The lake cabin had always been my escape. Tucked behind a line of tall pines and sitting just far enough from the water to avoid flooding, it was quiet in a way most people never experience. No traffic, no shouting neighbors, just wind through the trees and the soft slap of water against the old wooden dock. That morning, though, the calm felt heavier than usual, not peaceful, just tense, like the air knew something ugly was about to happen. I was there early, unlocking the front door and airing the place out. The cabin was over 100 years old, restored slowly over time. New beams, reinforced foundation, but the same creaking floors and stone fireplace. It wasn't part of any HOA. That had been made painfully clear in writing, on deeds, maps, and county records. Still, the nearby lakeside development hated that fact. Especially their self-appointed enforcer, Karen. I hadn't invited her. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks. But I knew her habits. She drove by the cabin almost every morning, slowing down just enough to stare like she was daring the place to disappear. I ignored it. I always did. Today, however, I wasn't alone, and that mattered. Inside the cabin, coffee brewed on the counter, while paperwork sat neatly stacked on the dining table. This wasn't a casual visit. I was meeting the state attorney general to discuss a long-running land access dispute affecting multiple properties around the lake. It was confidential, sensitive, and very much not something an HOA president had any business interrupting. We were midway through reviewing documents when I heard it. The crunch of tires on gravel. Not the slow, hesitant roll of a visitor, but fast, aggressive, purposeful. I glanced out the window and felt my jaw tighten. There she was.
Karen.
Parked crookedly near the dock, driver's door already swinging open. No hesitation. No knocking. She marched toward the cabin like she owned the land beneath her feet. I stood up instinctively, already annoyed, already exhausted by the thought of another confrontation. Before I could even reach the door, it rattled violently. Then came the unmistakable sound of metal scraping metal. She was trying the handle. The door burst open so hard it slammed against the wall. Karen stormed inside, red-faced, eyes blazing, phone already recording. She didn't look at me at first. She scanned the room like an inspector, lips curled in disgust, as if the cabin itself had personally offended her. "I knew it," she shouted. "Illegal meetings. Unauthorized use. This property is HOA controlled, and I am documenting everything." I told her to leave.
Calmly. Clearly.
I reminded her she was trespassing. That didn't slow her down at all. She stepped further inside, heels clicking against the wooden floor, waving her phone around like a weapon. "You don't get to tell me what to do," she snapped. "This lake belongs to the community. You can't just hide out here and think you're untouchable." That's when she noticed she wasn't alone. Her rant stuttered to a halt as her eyes landed on the man standing by the table, quiet, composed, hands folded, expression unreadable. She frowned, annoyed more than cautious. "And who is this?" she demanded, turning her camera toward him. The man didn't raise his voice, didn't flinch. He simply reached into his jacket, pulled out his credentials, and held them up at chest level. "I'm the state attorney general," he said evenly. "And you've just unlawfully entered a private meeting." The room went silent. Karen's face drained of color so fast it was almost impressive. Her phone dipped. Her mouth opened, then closed, like her brain was scrambling for an exit that didn't exist. And in that moment I knew this wasn't going to end the way she expected. For a few seconds, Karen just stood there, frozen between outrage and panic. Her confidence, the loud voice, the aggressive posture, the certainty that she could bully her way through anything, collapsed in real time. I'd seen her backpedal before, but never like this. Never this fast. The what?" she stammered, forcing a brittle laugh that didn't land. "That's not funny. You can't just say that." The Attorney General didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. He calmly placed his credentials back into his jacket and looked directly at her phone, which was still recording, though her hand was now visibly shaking. "You are trespassing on private property," he said. You forced entry into a confidential legal meeting. And you are recording without consent. Karen finally looked at me, eyes wide, silently demanding help. An ally, a denial, anything. I gave her nothing. I told her, again, to leave. Instead of backing away, she tried to recover control the only way she knew how, by escalating. Her voice jumped an octave, sharp and defensive. This cabin is under HOA jurisdiction, she insisted. We have easements. Community authority. You can't just. Stop, the Attorney General said. The word wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Karen flinched. There is no HOA jurisdiction here, he continued. No easement granting access. No community authority. We've reviewed the county plats, the historical deeds, and the shoreline rights. Everything you're claiming is false. Karen's phone dropped to her side. She took a step back, then another, heels scraping against the floor. Her earlier bravado drained away, replaced by something raw and ugly, fear mixed with anger. She wasn't used to being challenged by someone she couldn't intimidate. You can't threaten me, she snapped weakly. I'm just protecting the neighborhood. No, the Attorney General replied. You're harassing a landowner. And now you've potentially committed a crime. That's when she lost it. Karen spun toward me, pointing like this was somehow my fault. You set this up. You think you're so clever, ambushing me with some fake official. I'll have my lawyer. The Attorney General raised a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. I strongly suggest you stop talking, he said. Everything you say from this moment forward only makes things worse. The silence that followed was suffocating. Karen glanced toward the door, clearly considering a retreat, but pride wouldn't let her move yet. She tried one last play, authority by association. My husband works with the county, she said. He knows people. This will come back on you. The Attorney General didn't react. He simply nodded once. Good, he said. Then he'll understand exactly why this report is being filed. That did it. Karen rushed for the door, fumbling with the handle like it might lock her inside. She burst out onto the porch, muttering under her breath, nearly tripping on the steps as she fled toward her car. We watched through the window as she sped away, gravel spraying behind her, confidence completely shattered. Inside the cabin, the quiet returned, but it was different now. Charged. Heavy, with consequences. The Attorney General turned back to the table, completely unfazed, and calmly adjusted the stack of documents. Well, he said, that was illuminating. I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were steady, but my pulse was racing. That, I replied, is what I've been dealing with for years. He nodded thoughtfully. Not anymore. He pulled out a legal pad and began writing. Her behavior today, he said, just accelerated things. And for the first time since buying the lake cabin, I felt something close to relief. The Attorney General didn't rush. That's what struck me first. After everything Karen had just done, forced entry, threats, filming, he didn't look angry or shaken. He looked focused, methodical, like a man who had just been handed a missing piece to a puzzle he'd been assembling for a long time. He slid a few documents toward me. Maps, correspondence, formal complaints filed by multiple property owners around the lake. Names I recognized instantly. People who'd been quietly harassed, fined, or intimidated into compliance by the same HOA leadership. Karen's name appeared again and again, always attached to unauthorized enforcement and misrepresentation of authority. This isn't isolated, he said. It's systemic. He explained that the state had already received complaints about that HOA attempting to expand its reach beyond its legal boundaries, blocking lake access, threatening homeowners, fabricating easements that didn't exist. My cabin, sitting alone outside their jurisdiction, had become their obsession, a symbol of defiance they couldn't control. And Karen? I asked. He looked up. She's the tip of the spear. That was when I realized just how badly she'd miscalculated. Bursting into my cabin wasn't just a tantrum, it was evidence. Clear, undeniable, recorded by witnesses and corroborated by her own behavior. The Attorney General outlined what would happen next. A formal trespass report. an investigation into HOA governance, a review of every fine, warning, and violation issued beyond their authority, and, if necessary, criminal referrals for harassment and coercion. She thought she was enforcing rules, he said. In reality, she was practicing law without a license and impersonating authority. The weight of that sank in slowly. Outside, the lake shimmered as if nothing had happened. A pair of ducks drifted past the dock, completely unaware that years of intimidation were unraveling inside a century-old cabin. I asked him the question that had been sitting in my chest for years. What if they retaliate?
He didn't hesitate.
Then it gets worse for them. He explained that once an HOA crosses certain lines, especially involving trespass and false legal claims, the state takes it personally. HOAs operate under charters, not immunity. Abuse of power invites oversight, and oversight rarely ends gently. Before we wrapped up, he stepped outside with me. He wanted to see the property himself. We walked along the shoreline, boots crunching over gravel Karen had no legal right to touch. He asked about the access road, the dock, the markers I'd installed to clearly define the boundary. All of it checked out. Your paperwork is solid, he said. You did everything right. That sentence hit harder than I expected. Years of being told I was difficult, uncooperative, selfish. It evaporated in that moment. I wasn't the problem. I never had been. As he prepared to leave, a county patrol vehicle rolled slowly down the access road. Not for me. For the HOA development up the hill. The Attorney General watched it pass, expression unreadable. Timing, he said quietly, is everything. After he left, the cabin felt different.
Safer.
Not because Karen was gone, but because her power was. Later that evening, my phone buzzed nonstop. Neighbors texted in fragments, rumors spreading fast. Karen had been seen arguing with HOA board members. Emergency meetings were being called. Lawyers contacted. Panic replacing arrogance. One message stood out. She says she didn't know who he was. I laughed. Out loud. For the first time in a long while. Karen had spent years assuming no one would ever push back hard enough to matter. She had been wrong. And the lake cabin, quiet, stubborn, and free, had finally become the place where her authority ended. By the next morning, the fallout had fully begun. I woke up to a voicemail from the county clerk's office, followed by 2 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. When I stepped onto the porch with my coffee, the lake looked the same as always, calm, reflective, indifferent, but the human chaos around it was spiraling fast. The first official notice arrived by email before noon. The HOA was under formal review for exceeding its chartered authority. Not a warning. Not a suggestion.
A review.
That alone sent shockwaves through the development up the hill. HOA boards thrive on the illusion of permanence. Once that cracks, everything underneath starts to shift. By mid-afternoon, a patrol car was parked at the HOA clubhouse. Not lights, not sirens, just presence. The kind that makes people whisper and shut blinds. Karen, apparently, was not handling it well. A neighbor from the development texted me updates, like a live feed. Karen had shown up to an emergency board meeting demanding they stand their ground. She insisted the state had no right to interfere, that I had manipulated the situation, that she was the real victim. According to him, her voice carried through the thin clubhouse walls, sharp and shrill, while the rest of the board sat in stunned silence. The problem was, this time, nobody rushed to back her up. The Attorney General's office had contacted the HOA's legal counsel directly. Every unauthorized notice. Every fine issued beyond their boundary. Every threatening letter Karen had signed as HOA enforcement officer. All of it was now under scrutiny. And the lawyers, unlike Karen, understood exactly how bad this was. That evening, a certified letter was delivered to my cabin. Inside was a formal acknowledgement of my trespass complaint, along with confirmation that Karen had been named personally, not just as an HOA representative in the investigation. That detail mattered. A lot. You can hide behind an organization. You can't hide from personal liability. The next day, I saw her again. Karen pulled up near the access road, this time staying inside her car. No phone out. No dramatic exit. Just sitting there, staring at the cabin like it had betrayed her. When I walked toward the boundary marker, she rolled her window down an inch. "We can resolve this," she said, voice tight. "No need to involve the state." I told her the state was already involved. She swallowed hard. "You're ruining lives over a misunderstanding." "No," I replied. "You did that when you broke in." Her jaw clenched. For a moment, I thought she might explode. Instead, she drove off without another word. Behind the scenes, things moved fast. Homeowners from the HOA development began filing their own statements, stories of intimidation, fabricated rules, selective enforcement. People who had been too afraid to speak suddenly realized they weren't alone. Karen's authority collapsed not with a bang, but with 1,000 quiet confirmations. A week later, the HOA board announced Karen's temporary suspension. It was framed as administrative, neutral, necessary. Everyone knew what it really was: damage control. Then came the fines. Not against homeowners, but against the HOA itself. Compliance failures, governance violations, mandatory oversight requirements. The board was forced to bring in an external administrator to oversee operations. Karen disappeared from public view. The lake cabin remained unchanged. No barricades, no signs, no victory banners. It didn't need any of that. The real win wasn't humiliating her, it was ending the cycle. One afternoon, I received a final update from the Attorney General's office. The investigation was ongoing, but the direction was clear: structural reforms, possible civil penalties, and, if evidence supported it, criminal charges. He added one line at the end that stayed with me. "Her actions gave us jurisdiction we wouldn't have had otherwise." Karen hadn't just crossed a boundary. She'd erased it, and in doing so, had finally stepped into consequences she couldn't talk her way out of. The cabin returned to its old cadence, but my mind took longer to settle. When years of pressure disappear overnight, the absence feels louder than the conflict ever did. For days, I half expected another knock, another demand wrapped in false authority. Nothing came. The lake breathed. The pines whispered. The dock creaked the way it always had. Word spread quickly through the shoreline community. Neighbors who had kept their heads down started reaching out, cautiously at first, then with relief. One couple admitted they'd paid fines they never owed just to make the harassment stop. Another homeowner told me he'd stopped inviting friends because Karen would show up unannounced, inspecting his property. Each story carried the same undertone: exhaustion. Now, that exhaustion had an end date. The HOA released a statement that avoided names but couldn't hide the truth. Administrative overreach, corrective action, independent oversight. Translation: the game was over. Karen's authority was revoked, her access rescinded, and her signature stripped from every document she'd weaponized. The rules she once bent were suddenly rigid, and they bent toward accountability instead. I saw her once more, weeks later, near the water's edge. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't filming. She sat alone on a bench, shoulders hunched, watching the lake as if it had personally betrayed her. She didn't look defeated so much as emptied, like someone who finally realized the crowd had left. The investigation concluded without spectacle. No viral footage. No dramatic courtroom moment. Just outcomes. The HOA's charter was amended to narrow enforcement powers. Mandatory training became non-negotiable. An external compliance officer was assigned for 3 years. Improper fines were refunded, and a formal no-trespass order barred Karen from my property and the surrounding shoreline. Quiet justice, delivered steadily. On a copper-colored evening, I walked the dock and considered how close I'd come to walking away. Selling would have been easy, cheaper even. Letting the pressure win would have spared me the stress. But it would have handed her a lesson she didn't deserve, that persistence beats principle. Instead, she'd chosen the worst possible place to prove her reach. The Attorney General checked in one final time before closing the file. He offered a thought that lingered long after the call ended. "Abuse of power thrives in silence," he said. "Daylight doesn't argue. It reveals." He was right. The turning point wasn't anger or bravado. It was facts, presented calmly, backed by authority that didn't need to shout. The cabin didn't become safer because someone raised their voice. It became safer because someone respected boundaries and enforced them. Now mornings are simple again. Coffee on the porch, mist lifting off the water, ducks tracing lazy lines across the surface. The lake feels like what it always should have been, shared by nature, governed by law, owned by no one's ego. The HOA still exists. It likely always will. But its shadow no longer stretches to my shoreline. The boundaries are marked. The rights are clear. And the quiet, the honest kind, has returned. Karen wanted control. What she found were limits. And the cabin, standing where it has for a century, remains proof that sometimes the strongest response isn't confrontation at all. It's patience, preparation, and letting someone reveal exactly who they are when they think no one is watching.